Siam Hayasa Kamana Rabasi Vagoyi Sarasi Bamedino Hayasa Lamas Wachai Sivke Balai Lavidim Asa Al Lechia Ein Lach Melachai Mimikolai Havea Kolai Eha Bagaduva Hayula Loyevim Ganasa Yuda me aini umerai vavoida he yashva vakoyim loimata manoya choroi defei sigo habeinam sarim darchei tziain avela it's me believe ayer moyaid kol shareha shoimemin kayanean enachim tzuloi seanugais vehi marla Hayu tsare halarai shave ha shalu ki adonai haiga arai pshaha oilale ha halachushavi lifnei tsar vayetzei basia in koladara hayu sare ha kayalim lai matzu mire vayelchu v'lai chayach lifnei roidev Zachara Yerushalayim Gimei Aniyah Umrudeha Koyin Machamudea Shayu Mimei Kedem Binfail Amah Biad Tsar V'yein Oizei Lahu Hatzarim Sachaku Amishpatea Chait Chata Yerushalayim How can Nida Hayasa come Kabadeha Hizilua Kirau Erbasa Kamhinencha Batashav Achar Tumasa Bishulea Klai Zachara Acharisa Latei Red Pelaim Ein Menachem La Rei Adonai Esani Tigte loyev yadai parasar al kol machamadeha kira asa goyim ba'u mikdasha asher tzivisa loyavoyu vakahal lach cholama nenachim mevakshim lechem nasenu machamadehem b'yaychel lashiv nafesh Rei Adonai v'habitza k'yayisi zoi leila Loi alechem koloi v'rei derech habitu uru Im yesh machoiv k'machoivi Asher oila li asher oika Adonai B'yayim charoin apoim Mimaroim sholach eish b'atzmosai V'yirden aparas reshes l'raglai Yeshivani achoir Nusanani shoymema Kol hayayim davar Niskad oil v'sha'ai B'yadai Yistaragu Alu al savarich shil koichi Nisana ani Adonai bidei lo yuchal kum sila chalabirai Adonai b'kirbi kara alai mayei lishbair bachuroi gas torach Adonai lifsulas vasyuda aleile Ani vaychia Eini yair damayim kirachak mimeni Menachem meshiv nafshi hayu vanai shomemim ki gavar Oyev Peirsa tziayin beyadeha Ein menachem lach tziva Adonai liyakai svivav tzarav hayasa Yerushalayim Lida Beinayim Sadiku Adonai Ki Fihu Marisi Shimuna Cholhamim Urum Achayvi Besuloi Sayu Achurai Alachu Vashevi Karasina Mahavai Hey Mari Moini Kayanayus Kainai Bair Kavau Kivikshu Aichelamoi Vyashivu es nafsham Rei Adonai Kitzar li me'ai Chomar maru Nepach libi bekirbi כי מראי מריסי מחוץ שקל החרב, בבייס כמובס, שמעו כי ננחני, אין מנחם לי, כל היבא שמעו ראסי ששו, כי אתה עשיסי, ויסיים קרסה, ויהיו חמייני, תבואי חרסם לפניך בליל, למה כאשר העלת לי על כל פשעי, כי רבי סן חסי, וליבי דבוי. איכה יעיב פאפאי אדוני אספסיין, השליך משמיים ארץ תפארת ישראל, ולא יזכר אדוני רגליו, ביום אפוי בילה אדוני ולא יחמל, אס כל אס יעקב הרס בארוסוי, מבצרי ויהודה הגיע לארץ, חילי לממלכה ושריה קדם בחרייך, כל קרן ישראל השיב אחי ימיני מפני אויב, ויבער ביעקב כאש להבה, אכלה סביב דרך קשתוי כאייב, ניצב ימיני קצר, ויחרוק כל מחמדי עין, באוהל בציון, שפך כאש חמסוי, היה אדוני כאייב בילה ישראל, בילה כל ארמני שאה, שיחס מבשריו, וירף בבס יהודה, תעניה ועניה, ויחמס כגן סוכי, שיחס מידי, שיקח אדוני בציון, מועד ושבס, וינעץ בזרע אפי, מלך וחיין, זנח אדוני מזבחי, יאיר מקדשי, הזכיר ביד אויב, חיימי זרמני שאה, כל נוסנו בבייס אדוני, כי יאים מועד, חשב אדוני להשחיז חמאס בציון נעתקב, וישיב ידי מבניה, ויבל חיל וחיימה, יחדיו אומללו, תבואו בארץ שעריה, בעד ושיבר בריחיה, מלכה ושריה והגויים אין תורה, גם נביאיך לא ימצאו חזון, מאדוני ישבו לארץ ידמו זקני וציון, העלו עפר על ראשם, חגרו שקים, ירדו לארץ ראשון, בסולייס ירושלים, כלו ודמייס עיני חמרמרו, מאי נשפך לארץ כבדי, על שבר בסמי, בעטף אוילין ויונק, ברכי וייס קריה לימייסם, יאמרו איי דגן ויין, והסעטפם כחלל ברכי וייס עיר, בשתפך נפשם אל חיק ימייסם, מה ידייך מה דמלך, הבס ירושלים, מה אשווה לך ונחמך בסולס, בציון כי גדול לקיים, שברך מאיר פלח, נביאייך חזו לך שב וסופל, ולא יגילו על עוונך להשיב שבוסך, ויחזו לך מסעי שב ומדוכים, ספקו עלייך כפיים כל עברי דרך, שרקו ויניעו ראשם על בית ירושלים, הזוי סעים שיאמרו כלילת יפי, מסעיס לכל הארץ, פצעו עלייך פיהם כל אויבייך, שרקו ויחרקו שאין, אמרו בילנו, אך זה היום שקיווינו, מצאנו ראינו, עשה אדוני אשר זמם, ביצע אמרסו אשר ציווה ממקדם, הרס ולא יחמל, וישמח עלייך אויב, הרים קרן שרייך, Sakli ba men Adonai choimas basiyain hayridi chanachaldim ayamam valaila al titani fugas lach al tidaim basainech kumi roini valaila l'roish ashmarais Shivchi chamayim libech noichach b'nei Adonai sei elav kapayich al nefesh oy lolayich ha'atufim b'rav b'roish kol chutzos rei Adonai v'habitza lami alal takoi im tzechalna nashim piryam elalei tipuchim im yeharek b'mikdash Adonai kohain v'navi Shachavul aretz chutzos nar v'zokain b'sulasai v'achurai nafalu v'charev harakta b'yoim apecha tavachta lo'icha malta tikrav ki yoim amayid mugurai misaviv v'loi haya b'yoim af Adonai palit v'sarid asher tipachti v'ribisi oyavi chilam Ani hagever ani b'shevet evrasoi oisina hag vayalach koishech v'layir ach mi yashuv yafoich yadoi kol hayoim bila v'sari v'oiri shibar atzmoisoi pana alai vayakaf roish usla b'machasha kimay shivani k'mesei oilam gadar ba'di V'lo yetzeich mid nechashti kam ki ezak v'shavai ashasa sastam tefilasi gadar dorachai begazis nesivai sa iva jai vayrev huni ari b'mistarim dorachai soirei v'yfashachaini samani shameim dorach kashtoi v'yatzivaini Kamatara lachetz hayvi v'chilosai b'nei hashbasai hayisi s'chaik l'chalamin ginasam kol hayoim misviani v'amrarim mirvani lana v'yagreis bechatzatz shinai hichbishani b'efer v'tiznach Mishalayim nafshi nashisi toiva v'imar avad nitzchi v'soichalti me'adonai zcharon yumrodi la'ana avarosh zachor tiskar v'sosheach alai nafshi zoi soshivel libi al kain oichil Chasnei Adonai ki lo samanu ki lo chalu rachamav chadashim lebekarim Rabbi emunasecha cherki Adonai amara nafshi al kain oichil lo tayv Adonai lekoivav lenefesh tidushenu tayv v'yachil v'doimam Lishuas Adonai toiv lagever ki soil bin urav yeshev badad v'yidaim kinatal alav yitain be'afar pihu ulai yish tikva yitain makeihu lechi yisba becherpa ki lo yiznach loilam Adonai ki im hoika b'richam karoiv chasadav ki lo ina milibai vayage b'naish ledakei tachas raglav koi lasirei aretz latois mishpat gaver neged b'nai Elyon labais adam b'rivai Adonai lo ira mize amar vatehi Adonai lo itziva mipi Elyon lo isaitei harais v'hatoiv mais einain adam chai gever al chatav nachbasa d'racheinu v'nach ka'ira V'nashuva ad Adonai nisa levaveinu el kapayim elei lebashamayim nachnu fashanu morinu ata lo isolach tasakais tavav vatidafeinu Harak Tali Hamata Sakaisa Veananach Meavoir Tefina Sechi Umars Tesimainu Bekerev Hamim Patsu Aleinu PM Kalayevainu Pachad Vafachas Hayalanu Hashais Vashaver Pagay Mayim Zayreit Aini Al Shever Basami Aini Nigrav Loisidame Inafugais Adiashki if Vayre Adonai Mishamayim Aini Ayla Lenafshi Mikael Benai Siri Tzayid Tzaduni Katzi Pai Ayva Ichinam Tsamesuva Bai Chayai Vayadu Even Bi Tzafu Mayim Arashi Amarti Nigzarti Karasi Shimacha Adonai Mibai Tachtios Koili Ishama Talaim Osnacha Rav Chasi Shabasi Karafta Biyaim Eka Amarta Altira Rafta Adonai Rivein Avshi Kalta Chayai Raisa Adonai Avasasi Shavta Mishpati Raisa Kol Nigmasam Kol Machshavai Samli Shamat Acher Pasam Adonai Kol Machshavai Sam Aloi Sifsai Kamai Veheganam Alai Kol Ayoim Shivta Vekimasam Abita Ani Manginasam Tashiv Lahem Gamul Adonai Kamasai Ilahem Titain Lahem Ginas Laiv Talasacha Lahem Tirdaif Ba'af Vesashmidaim Mitachas Shemai Adonai Eichayu Am Zahav Yishne Kesem Atoif Tishtapeich Nav Nekaidesh Biraish Kol Chutzais B'neit Yain Haikarim Am Sulaim Bapaz Eicha Nechshavu L'nivnei Cheres Masa Yedai Yotzer Kam Tanim Chalet Sushad Heini Kukurehen Basami Lachsar Kaya Einim Bamidbar Davak L'shain Yainek Elchikai Batsama Oilalim Shalu Lechem Poirei Seinaim Hayechelim Matanim Nasham Ubachutzoi Simon Haimunim Alei Soilach Yibeku Ashpatois Vayigdal Avoin Basamim Echata Sedoim Hafuchach Moiraga Leichaluva Yodoim Zakun Zirel Mishelek Zachu Mechalav Adama Etzem Mipeninim Sapir Gizrasam Chashach Mishachayir Taram Loinikaru Bachutzoi Safadoi Ram Alatzmam Yavei Shayachayet Toivim Hayu Chalalei Cherev Mechalalei Rav Shehem Yazuvu Medukarim Nitanuva Yesodai Yedai Nashim Rachamani Yais Bishnu Bishnu Yaldehem Hayu Levarois Namoi Beshever Basami Kila Adonai Eschamasoi Shafach Charai Napai Vayatzese Ishbetziain Vatai Chal Yesoidosea Lo Yeminu Malchei Eretz Yoshevei Sever Ki Yavo Yitzar Vayev B'sharei Yerushalayim B'mechatois Neviah Avaynais Koyanea Shofechim Ekirba Da'am Tzadikim No Ivrim B'chutzais Negoyalu Badam B'lo Yuchalu Yigo B'voshem Suru Tamei Karu Olam Suru Altigau Kinatsu kamno amru bagoim lo yasifu lagur penai atoinoi chilkam lo yasif nabitam penai chayhanim lo inasau uskenim lo ichananu aidainu tichlena ainainu Elez raseinu havel b'tzipi aseinu tzipinu elgai lo yashiat sadu tzadainu Mileches b'chayvaseinu karav kitzeinu malu yameinu kiva kitzeinu kalim hayu roidefeinu minishay shamayim al harim delakonu bamidbar arvulanu ruach hapeinu mashiach adonai nilkad b'shchisaysam asher amaru Betzilai ninichye v'agoyim sisi v'simchi b'asedoim yosheves meretzutz kamalaich tavar kais tishkeri v'sisari tam avoyneich b'asiyain lo yasif lagroseich pakad avoyneich b'asedoim gila chatoisayich Zechai Adonai mehayalanu habita reis kerpaseinu nachalaseinu nefcha alizarim vateinu lenachrim yisaimim hayinu ve'ein avimaiseinu kamanois meimeinu b'chesef shasinu Heitzeinu b'mchiri avayu al tzavareinu nirdafnu yaganu v'lo yihunachlanu mitzrayim nasanu yad Ashur nispoyat lachem avosenu chata'u v'einam v'anachnu avonoseihem savanu avadim ma'asheluvanu pairei kain mi'adam b'nafsheinu navi nachmeinu mipnei cherev hamidbar oireinu kisanu nichmaru mipnei zalafa israv Nashim b'tziyaininu b'sulai isbarai yuda sarim b'yadam nislu Pnei zekanim la'in edaru b'churim tzechain nasau Unarim b'ayitz kashalu zekanim mishar shavasu Bachurim min ginasam shavas mesais libainu nepachlai vel mechayleinu nafela teres reshainu oinalanu ki ichatanu alaze hayadavel libainu alayle chashachu einainu al arziyain sheshamayim shualim hilchuvai ata adoinai lailam teshev Kis achal doir vadoir lama lanetzach tishkacheinu tazveinu loirech yamim hashiveinu Adonai elecha benashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem ki ima'is mastanu katzavta aleinu admaid hashiveinu Adonai elecha benashuva Chadesh yameinu kekedem. V'chor Adonai me'ayalanu, oy abitra reis cherbasenu, oy me'ayalanu, nachlasenu lepcha lezarim, oy batenu lenachrim, oy me'ayalanu, yisamim mayinu ve'in av, oy maysenu mekanonais b'chadesh av, oy me'ayalanu, me'imenu b'chesef shasinu, oy kinisu chamayim bazinu, oy me'ayalanu, Al tzavareinu nidafnu, oy kisinas chinam ladafnu, oy me'ayalanu, mitzrayim lasanu yad, oy Vashur tzadoni tzadonu k'tzayad oy me'ayalanu avayiseinu chatu ve'inam oy v'anachnu soivelim et zavenam oy me'ayalanu avadim mashiluvanu oy kishiluach avadim batavnu oy me'ayalanu b'nafshenu navi nachmeinu oy ki kafatznu me'ani yadeinu oy me'ayalanu ayreinu chistanu nimchmaru Oy ki khavaydam bekalay nemiroy mehayalanu nashim betziyainu oy ki ishes aishes rayutimu vezanu oy mehayalanu Sarim be'adam nislu oy ki gzayla seani chamesu v'gazlu oy mehayalanu bachurim tchayin asau oy ki beva'in senan nimsau oy mehayalanu זקנים משאר שווה סואי, כי משפט יסיים ואמנה יבסוי מהילנו שווה אס מסייסי בינוי, כי נבטלו עלי רגלינו מהילנו. נפל התרס ראשינו, כי נשרף בייס מקדשנו מהילנו, על זה היה דובר ליבנו, כי נפתל כבעית בייס מאבוינו מהילנו. על ציון ששמי מוי כי הר הבייס משמי מוי מהילנו התודנה לעולם תשב כי שכר לדור ודור למה לנצח תשכחנו תעזבנו לרחמים השיבנו אדוני לך ונשוב אחרי שמנו כקדם כי מאויס מאסתנו קצבת עלינו עד מועד השיבנו אדוני לך ונשוב אחרי שמנו כקדם
והכל קדוש ושייך תהילות ישראל, כל יוצא עוזר יומם. קדוש, 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 אז נצור את מלאג נורץ כבוהים. Sorry for
B'chol Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'achabdo shimcho, shimcho li'olam. B'chol Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol B'chado shimcho Oitchol Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabda shimcho li'olam, v'chabda shimcho li'olam. Oitchol Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabda shimcho li'olam, v'chabda shimcho li'olam, v'chabda shimcho li'olam, shimcho li'olam. Oy oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levovi, v'achabdo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo. Ay oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levovi, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo. Oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levovi, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, shimcho leyoylo. I thank you, Hashem, with all of my heart. B'chol levavi. And I'll honor your name. Shimcha le'ayla. For all eternity. B'chol Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levovi, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo. B'chol Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levovi, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo. Oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo. Oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, v'achabdo shimcho leyoylo, shimcho leyoylo. Oh yoy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levavi, v'achavdo, shimcho leyoyloshim. Ay oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levavi, v'achavdo shimcho leyoyloshim, v'achavdo oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levavi, v'achavdo shimcho leyoyloshim, v'achavdo shimcho leyoyloshim, v'achavdo shimcho leyoyloshim. I thank you, Hashem, with all of my heart. B'chol levavi, and I'll honor your name. Shimcha le'ayla, for all eternity.
Very briefly, for a moment, every year I often feel a great challenge in actually preparing for Tisha B'Av. It's also very ironic that on Tisha B'Av there is so much learning in inverted commas that takes place. Perhaps only ironic because of a prior misunderstanding of what the day offers each and every single one of us. The day itself is an opportunity. And thankfully, we are a part of a community that facilitates this opportunity. By way of introduction, I want to bring to the front of each of our minds Rafal Moshe ben Devora, who we are dedicating this facilitation that he should have a refuah shalema and a refuah shalema b'korov. The Torah tells us, make for me a sanctuary and I'll dwell within them. And cutting a familiar long story short, we ought to be aware of God's presence in our minds and in our hearts. But whether we are aware of his presence in our minds or in our hearts, he is still there. It's only through a combination of various factors, circumstance, choices, behavior, environment. A barrier is built, and it becomes difficult to be aware. And it becomes difficult to connect to our inner self. And it becomes difficult to connect to the inner self. The Gemara teaches that anyone who mourns the distraction merits to see its joy, merits in the present tense. Familiar statement is Just the acknowledgement of a problem is already the beginning to a solution. And on some level, simplifying the activity of the day, this would be an appropriate description. To identify that there is a problem, to identify that there is a barrier, to identify that we perhaps aren't in touch enough with our true selves on a national level and on a personal level. Through the process of acknowledgement, joy is possible almost immediately because one has begun a journey. This perhaps we could define as the Avodas Hayoim, the service of the day. It's a tremendous privilege to be able to host Rabbi Blachman once again, who brings a tremendous energy to our Yiddishkeit and to our learning and to our community, and affords us an opportunity, especially on a day such as this, to capitalize on the opportunity and to make the most of it.
No, you just heard my speech. He said it all. That's the only truth. I'm just going to be the Pirush of Rashi to explain what he meant. Let's start with the dilemma that everyone should be having. You know, we take Tisha B'Av, we understand somehow due to Jewish history, it's a sad day. Because it was the fact that we're sent to exile out of our country, out of our national identity, that all the horrendous things that happened to us in exile happened. If you look at the Kinos, you will see there's lamentation over the Crusades and over so many other things, not just the destruction of the temple. Tisha B'Av is seen as the epicenter of the tragic fall, the tragic history of the Jewish nation. That is true. It is a sad day. But the problem is, Halacha sees us not just as being sad, but as being mourners. The Halacha is that if someone is sitting Shiva, he's allowed to come tonight to shul for kinnus, because he's sitting amongst mourners. It wouldn't be enough if we're just sad. We are luckily defined as mourners, which means religion expects us to somehow actually be mourners. I suggest those who have experienced mourning contemplate and think, am I mourning now? Those who thank God young enough and haven't experienced it, long life, never have to. But those who've experienced mourning feel empty. I feel sad. This is nothing close to mourning. What does halacha define the feelings of a mourner? Maimonides writes in the laws of mourning that a person, when he encounters death, first and foremost, he is in total shock because he's encountered his mortality. He suddenly sees, we always knew we're going to die, But then it hits you in the face, and I don't care if it was a young child or an old man. You're encountering your own mortality and the sense of a stable identity in life that today we'll have it tomorrow is suddenly thrown in question. And that's the feeling we have for the first 3 days, as if there's a sword on my neck, literally a Damocles sword. It's from the 3rd day and further to the 7th. It's no more on your neck. You've gathered yourself, but you start figuring out, well, now that I know this, what do I do with this information? How do I continue further? You walk out of total shock into suddenly being quite concerned. If this is what it is, how do I continue my life? And that's what you should be doing from the 4th to the 3rd day of mourning through the 7th. And then it says, and from the 7th and further for the rest of your life, that sense that life is not forever follows you wherever you go. The sword follows you when you walk into the marketplace. That is the mourner. The mourner feels that his stability of life, the meaning of life, everything is torn asunder. He's in total shock, can't do a thing. It's only after 3 days that he's no more in shock, he has to contemplate further. Now the halacha says that the Avelis of Tisha B'Av is at least like from the 3rd day and further. That's why we're allowed to do malacha. The minhag is not to do malacha, but if you need malacha, you have to go to work because you have to eat something. Well, then you can do malacha. That is the halacha in its original state. Custom has developed how it's developed, but halacha basically there's no isur malacha. And the medieval scholars say, because it's like from the 3rd day and further, that an Avel, if you taka needs parnasa, and if you won't go to work, he had what to eat for supper, he go to work. I mean, he can do what it takes, B'tzina, it says. Seems to be saying that the Avelut of Tisha B'Av, we're not asking you to be in total shock. We're not asking you to say, oh, I've just encountered the destruction of my life, and I don't know how to react. We're expecting you to say, listen, friends, you did encounter, so to speak, 3 days ago, the destruction of your life. And what you're supposed to be doing today is figuring out, how do I take that further? We've been spared from the pure shock. We can't have that shock. How could we? It's so long ago. Yet somehow the remnant of that lack of stability in your life, something terribly missing, is you're being asked to think introspectively, how can I take this and continue life the way it was? How can I not calculate whatever I'm missing on this Tisha B'Av, and this should be my life changer as to my values, my goals, and it all. And that's what Tisha B'Av is supposed to be. Mourning does not mean halacha as far as halacha is concerned. It means, I'm sorry that someone passed away. It's a very natural thing to do. No, mourning is the fact that you encountered a destabilizing reality which shook the foundations of your stability. By us, it's encountering mortality. I still remember, I can never forget it. As soon as I got up from Shiva, after my father, Aharon Levracha, passed away, he was a young man, 68, passed away. The first thing I did is I went and bought a life insurance policy for my young wife. May die. I got to make sure she's taken care of. Which was exactly what Allah asked me to do. Think about the future. Well, I guess we have to find a way of seeing how this Tisha B'Av thing affects the stability of the life that we live, our comfort zone. And it should be shaking our comfort zone. And then we have to spend the day calculating What do we do about it? What do we do about it? The Rambam writes that the whole purpose of mourning, of this pachad, this shock, this daiga concern, is for one reason only: for introspection. Yifashvesh b'ma'asav, you must look into your actions and your thoughts, into your words, v'lachzor b'tshuva, and rectify that. Go back to a healthy lifestyle. The Rambam actually writes, people aren't aware that sitting Shiva is supposed to be a time of introspection and calculating where have you gone with your life. And now that you realize that no one's here forever, you thank God every morning with Moida'ani that you can actually see the sun, for goodness sakes. Be wise. What do you do when you add the time allotted? Because that's what it is. What do you do with the time allotted? How do you live your life? I remember telling the story, I don't know if it was last year or 3 years ago or 5 years ago, that I was once asked to speak at a memorial for the terrible incident that happened in New York, 9/11, the Twin Towers that went down. And I told them, honestly, it's too big for me to talk about. The numbers are too big. But what I can tell you is about people. Because I had read a tremendous article of transcriptions of last-minute conversations of people who were about to jump out of the window. And you know what those last-minute transcriptions were? Honey, I'm sorry. I do love you. Jackie, I'm sorry I screamed at you last night. I love you. There were a lot of I'm sorries, I'm love you, take care, I'll miss you. You know, things like that. Last minute fixing things. That's what I saw. I saw that the last minute you're fixing things. The things that you just figured, I'll do it some other time, if at all. The last thing people thought about before they were going to encounter their maker. I want to make sure that my relationship with those that are left are really the way I should have been living the whole time. So I say, that's our job today. We've encountered a major destabilizing factor, and I have to figure out what it is, and that somehow will help me into introspection and somehow rectifying my mistakes and living a better life. Better as a husband, better as a father, better as a grandfather, better as a teacher, better as a friend, better as a neighbor, better as a sibling. I have a lot to fix. And I'm sure that in my last minutes, I'm going to say sorry to everybody. Why do I have to die to say sorry? Why can't I live by saying it first? We have to really be at the end to realize what's real. Can we wake up a little earlier? Rama describes a person who doesn't do this during Shiva is a callous person. He lacks healthy sensitivities. If you don't react to mortality, to a destabilizing factor of your stable life, in that way, you lack healthy sensitivities. And God help me. It's true. Sometimes you feel that people are just callous. But that Rabbi was telling me that if I won't react with healthy reactions to this Avelus of Tisha B'Av, I'm also lacking healthy sensitivities. Now, how in God's earth am I supposed to be destabilized because some great city was destroyed a few thousand years ago? I'm living a comfortable life in South Africa. That's the truth. I mean, except for a little blackout here and there, I discussed this last night. That's not that bad in my eyes. You spend 2 hours candlelight talking to your wife instead of looking at who knows what. It's the bracha. Okay? That's not what I care about at the moment. I care about that you're living a good life. Do you really miss some temple? Are you really mourning? Is it destabilizing to you that we don't have skirted priests slitting throats of goats and sprinkling blood on altars? Do you really want Mashiach? You're kidding. It's a monarch. You can't vote him out. You know that the first king may be a good guy, but even King Solomon had a stupid son called Rehoboam, and we suffered from him. Why do you want a monarchy? Do you really want a monarchy? Does anybody want a monarchy? Raise your hands. You must be looking for a dictator. I prefer, can you imagine if I'd be stuck with Obama forever? Or Trump? I mean, just think of it. You know, thank God there's a democracy. You can vote him in, you can vote him out. But you want a monarchy. You're crying, Hashivenu Hashem Elechinu Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. I want a monarchy. I want skirted priests making animal sacrifices. Ya Allah. Like it's doesn't fit my Western palate, to say the least. So what are you crying about? It's very clear that those externalities are not what you're crying about, and you can't if you wanted to. You can cry crocodile tears, and there'll be external things. It's very sweet. Do you really think God wants us to put up a show? Don't you know? I don't mind if you're a good actor, because a good actor identifies with his character and actually starts crying for real. You know what I mean? But if you're not even just a little play over there in kindergarten, they expect me to play games, you're sitting on the floor. Aren't you sweet? Okay? Hope you have good knees. But really, I mean, come on. Isn't it external? Mazet, what are we doing here? Well, it's good. It's conducive to feeling sad because the light's out, and Daniel Sober read beautifully. Very, very, very emotional. It was very beautiful to hear. It stirred emotion. Yeah, it's nice. But that's not mourning. That's nothing to do with mourning. That's being sad. I'm supposed to be mourning on this thing. It is so far from me, so foreign to me, that I have no real reason to care about it. I actually have no reason to to want the Mashiach. I'm Orthodox, I promise. But I don't say I don't want him. I say I have no reason to want him. Big to get learning Gemara, you figure out these different things. Remember the differences in sentences. Why would I want him? Will he solve my tax problems? No. Will he solve my health problems? No. Will there be issues by minorities and majorities of the population? Yes. There'll be good parnasa in Israel, people, not here. Okay, I want to get straight. So what's the big deal? Will the death come up immediately? No, that's another stage in history. God knows when it will happen. All you're getting is a monarchy. Why do anybody want that? Why would anybody want a monarchy? I really mean it. Growing up in the Western world, you got to be, something's wrong with you if you want a monarchy. You know, and it's not going to be a constitutional monarchy like in England, which is just a little puppet. No, no, no. The king, the real king. He says, he does, and that's what happens. There's no parliament. Okay? Let's put this on the table. And the funny thing is, if you look carefully in Eicha that we just read together, there's no pasuk there describing the Beis Hamikdash. The whole moaning and groaning is about the destruction of Jerusalem, of Judea, about the walled cities of Judea, about Jerusalem, which was what? The capital of Judea. And yes, I agree, there's one pasuk which describes Har Tzion Sheshamein, the Mount of Zion, which is desolate, Shualim Olchima. That's the only pasuk which describes the Bet HaMikdash. It's at the end. Go through your Eicha again in English if you want. Yirmiyahu doesn't see that as the issue itself. He sees the idea of the Mikdash in a certain context, and the context is this total picture of the nation being thrown out of its domain and being walking into Galus. They don't have a country anymore. There's no more Malcha V'Sareh Bagoyim. Her king and her ministers have now been sent into exile. That is what he is mourning about. Even Yirmiyahu doesn't focus on the Beit HaMikdash. He sees the Beit HaMikdash in context of the national tragedy of losing your nationhood. You now belong to the diaspora. Don't have a country. Don't have a king. Don't have ministers, a government. You're just people. Separate people, but not a nation anymore. Read Eicha. It's frightening to see this. People don't notice it. Only one pasuk, which talks about the Har Tzion, the Beit HaMikdash. Everything else is about terrible things that happen. All the different things about Jerusalem. People looked at Jerusalem, says, you're nothing anymore. God's not with you. And so many different things you read there. Nothing about the temple and the service. Obviously, Yirmiyahu was telling us what we're supposed to be focusing on. And it goes like this. You know, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which, according to manuscripts, it's in the wrong place. And it's supposed to be the end of the Masechta. This was, we were enlightened by the Gaon of Vilna. The Gaon of Vilna writes, in the middle of the last chapter, it says, Yehi Ratzon, Sheibaneh Beit HaMikdash, may be the will of God that the Beit HaMikdash should be rebuilt. Expediently in our days, and give us our portion of learning Torah. He says this is supposed to be the end of the tractate of wisdom of our forefathers. He says, why would it be there? And this is what he writes. He writes, Ki Pirkei Avot Klal HaTorah. What does that mean? Now, when you read the ethics of our fathers, you must understand they didn't get that from Sinai. They didn't have a vision saying, oh, aselecha rav uknelecha chaver. You need friends. No, I agree. We discussed this week. You definitely need help from your friends. There's no question about it. Find yourself a friend. We didn't need God telling that from anybody at Sinai. But where does it come from? It comes from the distillation of the total laws of Torah. It teaches you its values. You take the laws and distill them into values. You listen not just to the words, but to the music behind the words. Ramban writes this as his commentary to Parshat Bishalach. He writes there's a pasuk which says, Hazanta lemitzvotav. You must listen to the mitzvos. And he says, listen what he means. Listen to the music behind the mitzvahs. What's the value behind the mitzvahs? What do I want you to be by doing these mitzvahs? Don't just hear directives. It's not a lawyer's religion, for goodness sakes. You got to be a poet. I want you to hear the music, the rhythm behind the mitzvahs. I want it to change you to be different people. There's an unbelievable idea this just struck me now. I once saw quite a few years ago. And I just want to say this is an idea written in a book called Mea Shiloach, written by a very great Hasidic master, a brilliant man. And he says, all of the 613 mitzvahs, they're all ways of cleaning your antennas and your sensitivities. You know what the goal is? Figuring out what God really wants from you at a certain junction in life in a certain time. All the 613 mitzvahs are 613 eitzos, quoting a Zohar. They're ways of focusing your antennas to be sensitive to what does God want from you now? And every person has junctions in which he doesn't know where to go, right, left, straight. And he says, if you would really do the mitzvahs the way they should be done, conscientiously, looking for what's behind it as the value system, you know what? You'd actually have a whole roadmap of life. And you wouldn't have to ask the rabbi, because you would be the learned man, which would know. There's no Shulchan Aruch for this. It's called, what does God want from me? Haven't you had that? I mean, I had that millions of times. I see so many things in life says, why did God have to show me all this pain? Could have sent someone else. I thought he's nice to me. And I asked myself many times, what does he want from me today? Haven't you had a hard day? Even in South Africa? Haven't you wondered, what do you want from me now? I've been good. I remember as a child, there was can I say a joke on Tisha B'Av? Yeah, I will. Okay, so I remember as a child, there was a famous comedian, Bill Cosby. He was put in jail afterwards, whatever it be. So he had this album called Noah. And Noah, and you have God talk to Noah and say, Noah? Yeah, who's that? It's God. What do you want from me? I've been good. You know, this is the way he starts. So sometimes I feel the same way about God to me. He says, listen, I've been good. Why are you piling on all this? What do you want me to do now? I had that multiple times, many times. Because I'm always looking to find out what he wants from me. If you haven't had it, because maybe you just don't even think he wants to think he's talking to you. I got news for you. He talks to you the whole time. He used to open your ears. And that's what the Meir Shilach writes, that all the mitzvahs are there to perfect the person, to be able to understand the value system of God. What does he want from you? And what you would perceive as a benign junction in life. The Gura writes, that is what's called Klal HaTorah. Not the laws of Torah, but what the philosophy, the feelings, the sensitivities, the culture behind the laws. So it's picky, obviously, what it is. Each of these rabbis learned the whole corpus, a massive Torah, and distilled from it mantras of their lives. So certain rabbis, this was their mantra. Hu haya omer. This is what he said. He said a lot of things, but this was what he always used to say. This was his mantra. This was his theme. Like everything ended up around there. Whether it be v'ahavta racha kamocha, this was Rabbi Akiva's thing, okay? And so on and so forth. Everyone had a mantra. It all came from their private subjective distillation of transforming religion into a culture. And that's what God wants. God does not want to be the head of a church. He wants to be a king. He wants to head a nation which has a culture, a value system, a language, a way of seeing things, certain sensitivities, and so on and so forth. So he says that's why, when did we lose this culture? So the Gemara writes, we lost the culture because even ein migdash, ein Torah. If there's no migdash, there's no Torah. Do you think he means just the migdash? No. He writes, where does he know if there's no migdash, we lose that aspect of Torah? We become very religious and engrossed into the particulars of the law. We become lawyers, but we lose the poetic side of religion, the culture of religion. What is it? What the value system behind it? He says the pasuk, because in Malka v'sareha bagoyim ein Torah. You know what the problem of not having a mikdash is? It's not because there's no Beis HaMikdash, because that was the epicenter of our cultural national identity. That was the place that thrice yearly, the whole nation came to Jerusalem. That's a lot of people. A whole nation thrice yearly comes the pilgrimage to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Chazal teaches they used to open the paraiches for them to see how, from far, the Aharon HaKodesh, and I will explain that some other time. It was a major experience, not just you're from. It was a national cultural event. It's like when I was a kid, there was a song by Scott McKenzie, and we're all going to San Francisco. You know what I mean? We all went to Haight-Ashbury. So you all went to the Beis Hamikdash. That was the epicenter of culture. That was your national identity. It's there from you. I see the light. I hear the music, etc. Yes, I see my national identity, my culture. I take it from there. I have it. So the Grush says loss of the Mikdash means to say because the Mikdash was just the epicenter of our national identity. But really the Churban is Malkot v'Sareha Bagoyim. There's no more king. There's no more ministers. There's no more government. We're no more an autonomous nation. And even we have somewhat of autonomy now, thank God. We're still a banana republic of the Western world. We haven't found our own culture around the Mikdash. You know what? If you live a life in which you want to be real, not simple. Sorry to say, there's a lot of people which are quite happy with having shallow relationships with anybody and even with themselves. It's a terrible story, but it's truth. I think people have given up on believing that they can be real. We're in such a shallow world, so external. Everybody has to be 18 to 20. If you get anything over that, you'll do everything possible to remedy that factor. No one wants to see life the way it is and try to make sense of it for themselves. They live in a la-la land. They'll defy science, they'll defy everything and live a lifestyle which show, oh, I'm 20, whether you're male or female. We don't want to encounter our mortality. We don't. We don't want to encounter meaning and purpose because we've given up on it. We've actually given up on it. We've become very cynical to God saying man can become special. We don't believe in ourselves. I remember I had a very good friend, Zecher Tzeit Levracha, Shlomo Karlbach. I was quite close to him as he used to stay in our home in Chicago years back in the late 50s, early 60s. So I remember him telling me, he says, Mendelin, that's what he used to call me, Yiddish. Okay. He says, I know you. I must have been, 8, 9? He says, you're going to teach people at the end. He says, are you kidding? I'm planning to be a lawyer. I honestly wasn't supposed to be a teacher or a rabbi. I was on the way to law school, and whatever happened, I ended up in this, and I'm very happy about it. Thank God. But my mom always said you could have been a better lawyer. But whatever it is, she says, you're going to teach people. Do yourself a favor. Never tell your students to believe in God. It won't help you. You know what you have to tell them? Believe in yourself. If you tell them that God believes in you, then maybe they'll believe in God. But if you just tell them believe in God without telling them God believes in you, it won't work. Because many people do not encounter God in their lives because they don't believe it's real. And they've given up on doing anything about it. We've even become cynical about it. What more cynicism is there than Christianity, which decides that man can never redeem himself from cardinal sin, so the Lord has to create a son and crucify him to redeem humanity because he can't fix it. It's literally a religion of saying, you people failed, so I have to fix the party. It's a declaration that you cannot rectify yourself. You can only have amazing grace. That's all it's going to get you going. You will not be able to fix it. That's terrible. Personally, I could never handle that. From day one, I love God because I know that God loves me. Day one, I'm searching for him because I know he believes in me. I do. Maybe I had good parents that put that into my head very young, and maybe good friends that helped me. I think everybody has to believe that God believes in them. You'll be a better person. You'll be able to change. You'll be able to grow. So you see, national culture was that. The national culture was, yes, we have a relationship with God. And his whole Torah, it creates a philosophy of life that we actually are bettered people. I miss that. I miss the society. I miss the fact that there's a whole nation, national identity, which believes in man, which tells man you can actually rise and change the world. And everything you do makes a better world, and everything you flop makes a worse world. I love an identity which puts on my shoulders the future of existence. Not just my shoulders, each and every shoulder in this room and in the world. Each of us can make a big difference. And we can. You know, we've become Mowgli. Mowgli, that's a character in Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book, which has no personality but reflects other people's feelings. We've become callous to ourselves. And Tisha B'Av is a time when you say, God, do you imagine that once there was a Mikdash, and once there was a nation, and once this was a culture of humanity believing in itself and internalizing the values of the Torah, not just the laws. A nation which spoke the language, heard the music of God's will, and therefore knew what to do in the gray area and those junctions of life. And I can't get there, and I'm struggling, and I'm past 7. And I struggle till today. Because religion feels like a Sisyphean task. You go up 3 steps and you fall back 4. And you want to go up again because you don't want to give up. That's the honest truth. I'm not saying that you don't fulfill the commandments, but you're not getting more real. Is it internalizing? Am I doing religion because the Lord's will? Or no, I actually now identify with the Lord's will, and the Lord's will is mine. Are you kidding? I'm at odds with him quite a few times. Here, I don't like the idea of animal sacrifices, but the Lord says there will be. It's my Western culture in opposition to his understanding of reality. I can do multiple halachas which are not simple to the Western palate. I don't want to do it now. I have a cultural rift between myself and my religion. It's because of that I'm somewhat cynical about my capability of growing out of it. And what we have to do is believe in ourselves because God believes in us. And we have to pray literally, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha, bring us back. Can you help us regain that national identity, that culture of Torah, that paradigm, Weltanschauung, in which we see things in a different way. We should get ears to hear the music of the mitzvos and then follow that dance. You know what? As a person which has struggled a lot in his life to want to be a real person, I do more than that. I'm not just sad. It is, for me, the key of my lack of success and my Sisyphean activity of going up, and I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. And that's what the Gemara says, that only people who live in a world of thought can actually really mourn over Jerusalem. Because if you live in a world of consciousness, not just doing things, but why and what, then you realize the challenge. And you say, wow, it could have been different, and it was different, and it's messed over. We have to change this. That's where the Gemara says something unbelievable. The Gemara says, Kol Talmud Chacham sheyesh bo deya. If a Talmud Chacham not just knows his sugya splitting laws, but he also has internalized, das means internalization of information to become part of his Weltanschauung. That's what das means. Das means emotional intelligence, not just cerebral intelligence. Kol Talmud Chacham sheyesh bo deya ki ilu nivna beis hamikdash b'yomav. It's as if he built the temple. I mean, I don't see. Any sacrifices? No. No. You know what it is? You started building that you actually have finally internalized your information and it's transformed into your culture. And if you haven't done that yet, you wish to will to want to aspire to. But at the end of the day, that's your roadmap. So I got to pray and wish that this Tisha B'Av should be a day in which we reflect on our religious growth and more so on just being bona fide people, real people. I'm going to say it again, whether you're a real father, grandfather, I'm talking to myself at the moment, spouse, a real neighbor, a real friend, a real sibling, a real person. Just be a real person. If you'll be real, things will roll further. But you're missing that. I need that culture which is conducive for me to be real. And I'm going to end with a poem, if I may. You know, I still have 2 minutes, so I can end with a poem. It's a song, okay, this is not very Jewish. Sorry, to say the least. It's what did I lose my sheets? If I don't have my sheet, I'm not going to do it. Yeah, drop a sheet. Oh, it's over here. It's a Pink Floyd, if you really want to know. If you don't mind, should I say Zecher Tzadik Livracha or something like that afterwards to make it Jewish? But the Rambam writes in his Pirsha Mishnah on Avos that if you find lyrics written by I don't care who, and if they teach you meanings, morals, and ethics, hug it. He said you can hear a lot of stuff in Hebrew, the holy language, but they're meaningless. Drop it. I want you to understand. That's why I'm going to do this now. And I'm not going to, well, the music is quite complex if you know the song. It's called Wish You Were Here. I just want to read it because many people just hear the music, which is very good, and they somehow don't get the lyrics. And for me, these lyrics is exactly my feelings on Tisha B'Av. Just wish you were here to me means God. Did they get you to trade hot ashes for trees? You had trees. Culturally, you have now substituted for hot ashes. Did you exchange your walk-on part in a war for a lead role in a cage? You're unbelievable. But we've exchanged it for something which is meaningless. I were just 2 lost souls, I think more than 2, swimming in a fishbowl in a little myopic world. Year after year, running over the same old ground. And have you found the same old fears? Wish you were here. To me, that's a prayer to God. I wish you were here to take me out of my fishbowl. I wish you were here and I wouldn't make the stupid decisions of embracing the hot ashes and giving up my trees. I wish you were here and I wouldn't make the stupid mistake of changing your lead role in a war for betterment of humanity and the world into a big deal. You put yourself into my myopic little cage. I'm going to wish us all, I wish he was here. Make a meaningful day out of this.
I want to take the opportunity to thank Rabbi Blachman. You know, the other day I was talking to someone about the differences between attendance in shul on a Friday night versus Shabbos morning, or Shabbos morning versus Shabbos afternoon. And then the guy turns to me and he says to me, how many hours a day do you want me to actually be here in the shul? And the truth is, if you think about how many hours we actually spend here, it's quite remarkable. Tisha B'Av has a load of difficulties on so many different levels. It might be the customs, it might be the laws, it might be what it's actually about that makes it quite difficult. I just thought maybe to put it into our minds for a moment, it is also a once a year experience. And whatever one's intention was, perhaps for the next 24 hours, to immerse oneself a little bit more than perhaps we intended to utilize the opportunity that it is. We're about to show a very special interview, and we do in fact have him on the line live here this evening as well. A man by the name of Pinchas Guttер survived the Holocaust. An amazing memory, an amazing mind, even currently. I want to thank him in advance for giving us this opportunity. I want to thank Rabbi Katz, Tali from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. There's so much to learn from such individuals. It also is an opportunity for us to peel away another one of the layers. And then tomorrow morning after davening to explore the kinnis from a slightly different perspective, a different vantage point. Tomorrow afternoon to listen to Rabbi Yaakov Trump and Rabbi Reuven Zayel and Rabbi Avigdor Blumenow and Rabbi Ken Sparrow. And then to daven together. And each stage of the process to immerse ourselves a little bit more than we intended to do. And it will be of value. It will be of tremendous value. Again, grab a seat. We'll start now.
Oh, yo, Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levavi, v'afa b'dor, v'achata shimcho le'yoyelo. Ay, oy, Hashem, Hashem Elokai, bechol levavi, v'achavida shimcho le'yoyelo, v'achavida shimcho le'yoyelo. Oy, Hashem, Hashem.
On behalf of the Base Shul and Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, it is our great privilege to interview and speak to Pinchas Guttер. Pinchas Gutter is a survivor of the Shoah, and his story is certainly a remarkable one. Pinchas, welcome. Also welcome to Tali, the founder and chief executive of the center. Tali will be joining me in talking to Pinchas this evening. And Pinchas, großen Dank, große Dankbarkeit für dir. Welcome. And Tali, over to you.
And thank you, Rob, for the partnership. Thank you to Rabbi Zulberg for the wonderful long-term partnership with the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. And this Tisha B'Av, it gives me great honor and pleasure to have a conversation with a friend and someone that I respect tremendously and look up to. And this is Holocaust survivor Pinchas Guttер, that of course lived in South Africa for some years, but he's joining us today from Toronto, Canada. And Pinchas, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe I will start for our audience that don't know you, because you lived in Cape Town most of the time, of course, that you lived in South Africa. But maybe tell us a little bit about your family growing up. You came from a Hasidic family, and I think that our audience will be quite interested to learn a little bit about who was your family. Tell us about your parents, about your sister, about your life before the Holocaust.
Well, I was born in Łódź in 1932, and we were all Gerech Hasidim. And I grew up in a very religious, household. I only had I had a twi'lek, I had a twin sister. My mother couldn't have children after that. She was very ill. And so we had a very large extended family, but we were all Hasidim. And my father, for example, to give you an idea, that I've got a photographic memory, so I remember everything. And I remember even when I was a child, before I started walking, my father had a habit that he had, the Großen Schatz, the Wilner Schatz, the big one, a very big one, with a big shrunk, where it was specially there. And every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, and of course children infants get up early, and he would sit in our dining room, because the lounge and dining room was one very, very big and huge. I can actually draw a picture of exactly what that flat looked like. And he would study parshas of the Gemara. He used to get up in the morning. I suppose he used to do his ablutions, and then he would sit down. And before davening, he would go and study a parsha of Gemara. And he would smoke a cigar, and I would inhale the scent of the cigar, and I would crawl underneath his legs underneath. Like he would be sitting there at a high table, and I would be crawling underneath, inhaling it. And then after that, later on, when I was a bit older, I would get the boxes and the rings of the cigar. So this kind of, I was never a smoker, but this kind of smell is still in the scent of the cigar is still there. And so we were really a very Hasidic family. And my father used to go to the Ger Rabbi every Rosh Hashanah. He would come back for Yom Kippur, but Rosh Hashanah, he would disappear to Ger, to Gura Kalvaria, where the Ger Rabbi was, the Tzadik Zichrono Levrucha. And during we had a wonderful life, because my grandfather, from my maternal side and my paternal side, were both Gerech Hasidim, obviously, because they must have had a shidduch. And my grandfather from my maternal side was a farmer, so we used to go in Yelon. He used to live in Yelon. He had a farm. And after the war, when the first time I went back to Poland in 2002 to say Kaddish in Majdanek and Elmol Rachamim and all that, and I went to the Historical Institute in Yelon, and I told this professor who was in charge of the Historical Institute that my grandfather had a farm, and he said, "Niemożliwe," which means impossible. Jews didn't have farms. But I played on the farm. I played with the cows and the chickens and the geese, and my grandfather used to export eggs to England, to England in Kalach. Kalach is I don't know how to say. It's like to conserve the freshness of the eggs. So this is what my grandfather used to take the day, for example, for Pesach. My mother used to stop, have a special room, and after Purim, she started cooking for Pesach and put away all the food that was going to be in a special place. And then we had a balcony where the building belonged to my grandfather. He gave 50% to his 5 siblings, his children. And in the middle of Łódź, in Zachodnia 54, which was right in the middle of one of the bigger streets in Łódź. And we had a balcony, and on the balcony there was a yearly sukkah. It was, it had during the year, the dach used to be closed, and then and Pesach used to, Sukkot used to open it up and put schach and everything else. So we had a very Jewish life, and I was a very happy Jewish child. My mother finished gymnasium because the Ger Rebbe encouraged, the women to go to gymnasium. So she gave me Polish books without my father's knowledge, of course. And that's basically how my life went on until the age of 8, when the war started on the 1st of September 1939. But until such time, there was anti-Semitism. My father, they had a winery, the second largest winery in Poland, which was making wine not only for Jews. They had kramim in Hungary, and my grandfather had vineyards in Palestine of those days, and we could never find them after the war, but he did. And they used to bring the must there, and I was started to be taught to be a winemaker when I was actually 3.5 years old. My father used to take me down to the cellar and started teaching me how to make a winemaker. I'm not going to tell you exactly how he did it. I tell it in my book, and I tell it to the children when I go to school, because it's a very interesting way of teaching a child how to become a winemaker. And this is how life was. I experienced as the Semitism, young boys. I was blonde and blue-eyed, so of course, you know, I was kind of like, but I had long payers. So they used to pull my payers and said, Judeo-Palestinian, Jews go to Palestine, the boys, but I used to play with them afterwards. So, you know, the thing was, it was kind of, it was on Saturday in Łódź, where there were 250,000 Jews living there before the war. It was like being in Jerusalem. The women used to walk out with their prams, and the Hasidim used to walk with their talasim to shul. We had a shtibel downstairs in Zachonia 54 in our building, because, you know, every Hasidic place had a shtibel. There were lots of shtibels, and we actually were next to number 56. 56 Zachonia was one of the big shuls, and we were next to the shul. But we didn't go to the shul. We went to downstairs, and of course the only benches were for the elderly people. Everybody else was standing, and you know, Hasidim don't look one way. They walk around all the time, and they daven, and they shout, and they sing, and this is giving our chaya. So this is what happened before the war.
It's amazing, Pinchas, because the way as a child up to the age of 8, your memory is so rich. By the way, we have things in common, because my grandmother from my mother's side is from Gura Calvaria, and was very close to the Rabbi. So I never knew that we have that connection as well between us, and it's quite amazing. But what I'm thinking about the richness of your childhood, and I know that you love music. Until today, you sing, you have nigunim, and that love for music, I think, came from that very happy childhood, was it?
Well, it's very strange, because let me tell you a story. When I was about 4 or 5, I can't remember exactly what my age was, I fell ill with pneumonia. And I had a very bad time in the first. And I remember that my mother took me and put me into her bed. They had the bedroom that looked out the window, looked out on the street, and on Zachonia. And then, so my father's bed was next to the window, and my mother's bed was next to the door. So I was put into my mother's bed. They tried all kinds of things. And they tried gehackte Beinkes. This is, you know, these Chinese, cups, and they cut my back, and they drew blood, and they took blood from my father, and they injected it to my backside, and nothing helped. But I remember the name of the doctor. Dr. Hirschwinkel was our doctor, and he managed to get sulfa drugs from Vienna. And the sulfa drugs were a precursor of antibiotics. So he gave me those tablets, and I started coughing up all that stuff, and I started getting better. And after a few weeks, I was much better. And then after about a month or 2, my lungs were weak, and Dr. Hirschwinkel said they must send me to the mountains. So I went. There's only one range of mountains, as you know, in Poland. Everything is very flat. So there's the Tatra Mountains, then between Czechoslovakia and Poland. So I was sent to live with Gurale, with the mountain people, not Jews, Christians. And we lived in huts together with the animals and everything else. And for me, it was a machaya, because why? I loved animals, because I was very close to animals, especially horses on my grandfather's farm. So for me, it was really a wonderful place. And I didn't have to daven. I didn't have to study the Talmud. I didn't have to study the Chumash every week. And my grandfather didn't, kind of ask me on Saturday all the questions that I knew off by heart, because he used to put me on a table in Shalashidus. And then he would ask me, what's what Moshe getun? What's what this getun? What's this given in Miriam? And so he used to ask me all these questions. And then, I didn't have to do anything. My mother used to come and visit me occasionally, and I used to run around. On Sundays, they had a bandstand in the park in Shavnitsa. It was a place called Shavnitsa, very near Zakopane, which is where people go to with skis to snow mountains and things like that. And you drink the water and you fresh air. And I was there for several months. So I used to run down on Sundays, and I would sit on the grass and listen to the music. And the music did something to me. And on the way back, I went back to the mountain in the evening. And Poland is a Marian theocracy, as you very well know. So the Częstochowa is the place where, you know, it's very important. The Black Madonna is there. And I used to listen to the sounds of the orchestras. And then on the way back, I used to stop outside the church. I knew I couldn't go inside, but I would stand outside and I would listen to the choir and the singing. And these things stuck in my mind. And for some reason, I have a good voice. You know, I've been, for 35 years, I've been doing the Kiev Shul here. I've been their full-time honorary cantor. I've been doing all their services except for COVID for the last 2 years. I haven't been able to go, but I used to do Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and every Shabbos I used to do it. I used to read I can read the Torah. I can do all kinds of things. So I became a kind of, you know, they didn't have a cantor, so I became their honorary cantor. And one day, this is the kind of the thing that kind of sticks in my mind. I forgot myself. So when I was going back, the sounds of Brahms or Beethoven or whoever came out, and the singing was so beautiful that I walked towards the church and I knelt on the first step. And as I knelt on the first step, and I don't know for how long I was kneeling there, I didn't go inside, obviously. Somebody started hitting me from the back. And I looked around, and there was a middle-aged man, and he said, I don't know if you know what the Parshiva Žid is, you leprous Jew, you terrible, what do you call it? How do you dare contaminate the soil of our Holy Mother? And he chased me away. This was the main kind of anti-Semitic thing that stuck with me. And I got very frightened, and I ran back, and then the next day, of course, I forgot about it. But I kind of inhaled the music and the sound. And after that, I started singing, and I kind of paid more attention. For example, my Chalashidis, of course, you know, Hasidim sing a lot of so this is what I listened in. And although in my family there were no singers, no nothing, I became a kind of singer. And in Cape Town, I became the full-time first of the Ponivizh Shul, the cantor, honorary, always honorary. I mean, I didn't need them to employ me. Just like here, they offered to employ me, and I said, no, I'll do it for you for free. And then when I became the president of the old age home in Cape Town, I took over the synagogue, and every Saturday I lived very near, so it was no problem for me to walk there. And I would walk down from Yeovil Road down to Highlands House, and I would conduct every Saturday morning. Friday night they had somebody else, and I used to go to the shul in next to the Parliament, you know, to the big shul. But on Friday night, on Saturday morning, I used to always conduct their services, and I conducted their services Yom Tovim, Rosh Hashanah, and all year round. So that's how I became a cantor, and I kind of like a amateur cantor, but I have a very good voice, and I can do it. So and all these niginim. I mean, for example, when I stand on Kol Nidre night, I am not in my shul on the bima. I am in a boidem. You know what a boidem is? An attic, where my father and I were hiding in September 1942, and davening. My father was put me underneath his talers, and we were hiding from the Nazis who were taking everybody to Treblinka. So that's where I am. And I sing to myself, and I sing, Or daru ala tzadik, uleishrelei v'simcha. And there I am standing there underneath my father's talers, and he's hugging me to his chest. And my father became like a giant. He was a very simple man, and he managed to keep us safe and alive until the uprising, until 3 weeks in the bunker. And then we finished up in Majdanek, and the Rabbi Shalom, you know, saved one of our family.
And thank you so much for sharing. It's very, very emotional to think about this idyllic childhood, and then, you know, the years of suffering from Łódź to Warsaw, then the Warsaw Ghetto, and then, of course, you know, taking all your family to Majdanek. But maybe, Pinchas, maybe you can share one, and I know, Rob, you have a question about the Warsaw Ghetto period, but when we stay in the Warsaw Ghetto, before we move to where else you went, and I will ask you to share some stories, you can share one or two of those stories, like the story that you told us now about the Boydem, about hiding from the Germans, from those Großaktionen, from these deportations to Treblinka time. What was it like for a little boy at 10 years old, 9 years old, to be in the Warsaw Ghetto?
Well, my father had to, one of the things that is quite extraordinary is that I never experienced hunger in the Warsaw Ghetto, because my father managed to, he was a winemaker. He couldn't do anything else like make wine. So we had a little apartment in a building on the corner of Mila and Nalewki, going north on the corner of Mila and Nalewki, turning left. And it was number 1949, and the front of the building was destroyed. And he found a very tiny apartment on the first or second floor. I don't remember which floor. Next to us was the Ger Rebbe's eldest brother's son. He lived next to us. And he set up two kind of little vets in the kitchen, and he used to buy rozinkes, currants or raisins on the black market, and he would make kosher wine. And he would send me out already before the ghetto started, because the ghetto, there was quite a big hiatus between the time that my father arrived in Warsaw. He walked, we took the train as Christians, as you know the story, and because we were blonde and blue-eyed, my mother was very beautiful, and so we had no problem taking the train in around about December. And then I would run around to the cafes, and I would collect bottles, and he would then, of course, clean them and put water in them and keep them for 3 days to make sure that they were kosher. Because my father was a Hasidic Jew. I mean, regardless of what was going on, he was going to keep everything according to the Rebbeinu Shalom had gesucht, also in the Torah had gesucht. So I used to be the supplier of bottles. And then in the ghetto, the same thing. I used to run to there were lots of Jewish cafes in the Warsaw Ghetto, as you very well know the history. You know it better than maybe even I, although I was there. And I was standing outside these cafes and then collecting the bottles. We used to throw them out. There was no, today you keep the bottles and you save them. But in those days, everybody threw out the bottles, and I used to collect it. And then on Fridays, he gave me a rucksack, and he gave me 5-6 addresses with some bottles. And my father used to buy flour, first white flour, and then there was no white flour. And my mother used to bake some colors, little ones, and I would supply give it to Jews who had money, because there were a lot of Jews, and I mean, there were, there were the beginning 350,000 Jews in the small ghetto, and then towards the end of 1942, there were close to 500,000, 450,000 Jews came from all over. And so I was the supplier of I was a kind of the supplier. I used to. This is how we made a living in the Warsaw Ghetto. My father made sure that he used to make the wine. And let me tell you another story, which is so embedded in my mind that you can't. This is something again which is quite miraculous in a sense. We dug a bunker on the underneath the ruins. We dug a bunker, and for about 150 people, there was an entrance on Mila, and there was an entrance in Nalewki, which was hidden. You had to it was like a mine, going down into a mine for 150 people with electricity and water. The 19th of April, 1943, was Erev Pesach. My father had some bottles of wine, obviously from leftover. So he took them. We got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We ran down to hide in the bunker. The baker who used to bake for the 30,000 official Jews, there were 30,000 or more wild Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, and there were 30,000, official Jews working for Tebens and the other one. So there was a baker, used to bake bread officially for the factories. So he must have baked some matzah. So we went down, he brought matzah, and my father brought the wine. And of course, Hasidic Jews know the Aguda of my heart. They didn't need an Aguda to be able to, oh, maybe somebody did have an Aguda. But we celebrated Yetzias Mitzrayim in that terrible time, asking for, for God to save us, and praying and crying, but celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim at the same time. So how can you explain this kind of humanity, devotion, spirituality of Jewish life in Poland before the war, or Jewish life everywhere? I mean, we go back thousands of years, and people don't realize, who we really are. That we are a peaceful people. We are an emphatic people. We empathize against everybody else. When I see what's happening in Ukraine, despite the fact what I suffered at the hands of Ukrainian guards, I feel my heart breaks to see how these children, at the end of the war, when the Germans were being expelled from Czechoslovakia, when I was liberated in Theresienstadt, I felt terribly upset when I saw little children being abused by Czechs and Russians and things like that, which they did because they suffered. But the fact is that I felt sorry for these people, and I felt empathy, because that is the Jewish soul.
Pinchas, just, the empathy of the Jewish people and the, the following up, as you said, the Jewish people trying to do the will of the Eibishter. Just in terms of doctors in the Jewish ghetto, now more and more facts and literature is coming out on doctors in the Jewish ghetto and how the Jewish doctors managed to perform, life-saving operations and do as best that they actually could. Some even heroically went with their patients to Treblinka. Did you have any personal experience about doctors in the Jewish ghetto? And if so, could you relate any of that to us?
Well, I had one experience, and my experience was I came down again, my lungs were weak. And of course, meat was not available in war ghetto, especially kosher meat, you couldn't. So the only meat that was available that you could buy was horse meat. And the doctor came, and he told my mother that if she doesn't feed me some kind of protein or something like that, I will not be able to survive. So she went and bought horse meat, and she cooked up a soup out of horse meat, and she forced me to eat. And I wouldn't eat it because it wasn't kosher. And so can you imagine that the little boy of 9 or 10 years old, I don't remember which year it was, it must have been either 41 or 42, who was so embedded in Judaism. My father found a melamed. There were no schools, there were no yeshivas, there was no nothing. So he found a melamed, and he paid him for as long as he could. And 8 or 9 boys, we used to go and study the Talmud. We studied Nedurim at Neran. Now, the Durim is one of the most difficult Masechtas, and yet we went and studied the Talmud with that we shouldn't forget where we come from and who we are. So Yiddishkeit was certainly in the Warsaw Ghetto as much as possible was observed. And we weren't allowed to have this. We were at one stage they did open schools. I mean, everything. It was an apocalyptic, hell. I mean, this is what the Warsaw Ghetto was. You cannot imagine. I mean, if I could project some of the scenes that I saw in the Warsaw Ghetto, like standing in front of a window of a cafe and seeing inside SS with the blue police, the Polish blue police, with Jewish police dancing and singing with women, and then outside next to me, where I was going to try and collect some bottles, were lying dead bodies. Because from 1941 onwards, more and more people. Eventually, the Havre Kadisha had these wooden kind of Vigelach and carts, and they used to kind of collect it like you collect schmatters or garbage, and they dug a huge pit. If you go to the cemetery, you know where that there's the huge pit, and they used to have like just throw it in. There were a few Jews staying there, Hasidic Jews maybe saying some prayers, but basically it was like throwing garbage. So this is the conditions that were in the Warsaw Ghetto, so much so that it is impossible to try to understand, to convey, to even imagine. For somebody who was there today, I kind of can't imagine how was it possible for anyone to be able to survive. There's a woman writer in Toronto. Her name is Anna Porter, and she writes books. And she was Hungarian. She's not Jewish. And I went to one of her book readings, and she was suffering book. So when I went up to get her signature, she said, "So where are you from?" So I said, "I am." She says, "Are you a Holocaust survivor?" Yes, I said, "I'm from the Warsaw Ghetto." So she said, "I didn't think that anybody's from the Warsaw Ghetto." So that's what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto was, I don't know how to describe it. I really don't. Apocalyptic hell is just about the only possible word that I use. And even that is not enough. Yeah.
But from that hell on earth, you were taken to another hell with your parents and with your twin sister. And that was when you were deported to Majdanek.
Yeah, we were in the first week of May, after being 3 weeks in the bunker. According to some people, as we were being kind of we had air vents in the ruins, and the sound came through, and we were chased. We said, if you don't come out in half an hour, this is what they used to do. We are burning down the buildings, which they did, and we would throw gas bombs in, and you'll all die, so you must come out. So we came out. And the one thing that I wanted to share with you is this little boy, when he came out, these paratroopers with their machine guns on their breast in smocks were shouting, "Hände hoch, nicht schießen, Hände hoch, nicht schießen." And I felt very proud. I felt so proud because I felt they're scared of us. I mean, with my childish mind, I kind of felt, so proud. And then, of course, we went to the Umschlagplatz, which was, again, a hell which you cannot even begin to describe. They kept us there for nearly 36 or 38 hours or something, and then they pushed us into the cattle trucks, and we thought we were going to Treblinka because we knew all about Treblinka. We knew about within 6 weeks or so, everybody in Warsaw Ghetto knew, and my father certainly didn't trust the Nazis because he was beaten up in the first few days, so he didn't trust them, and we were always hidden. So we survived until that time, and we finished up in Majdanek. And when we arrived in Majdanek, which of course at that time I didn't know it was Majdanek, we arrived actually in Lublin, and we walked towards the camp. They separated men from women, and the women from and then children who were separated. It was like everything was like the dogs and shooting and killing. For them, it was a kind of like a game. And my sister was separated from my mother for some reason, so she was put on a side with children. And my father must have known something, because he said to me, I was a head taller than my sister, and I was quite tall for my age, and I was blonde, and I was blue-eyed. And he said, "Don't tell them you are 11. Tell them that you are 5 years older. If they ask you, tell them you're 5 years older." And then suddenly I saw my sister running towards my mother, because she also spied my mother, just like I was watching my mother, where she was dealt with the women. And as she was running, I was watching her blonde braid. She had this long blonde braid that she wouldn't allow my mother to cut it off, despite the fact that my mother had to go to lengthy, long-term, very difficult times in Warsaw Ghetto to keep clean, because you used to get gnidi, which is lice in your hair. So she had to wash her hair with neft to keep it, but my sister wouldn't allow her to cut her hair. So she had this long braid, and I was watching the braid, and as she was running towards my mother, she hugged my mother. So I saw her from the back. And from that time, my photographic memory clicked off. And everything that I remember is the blonde braid about my sister. For example, when we went to go to the children, to collect the children from the baker on Saturdays, she would walk with me, she would take one side and I would take the other side, and we would walk, because that was the whole lunch. Everything was inside the children. But I know she's walking next to me, but I can't see her. I can see things when I was, an infant, but I can't remember. And the first time I told this story, I actually broke down very badly, because you know, you don't have any photographs. You don't, everything was burned. So all is what you have is at least you can imagine how your father looked like, how your mother looked like, and how your grandfather and your paternal grandparents and aunts and uncles. But you can't remember your twin sister, the one you were born with, at the same time.
And Majdanek, of course, was the place where the separation and the murder of the rest of your family took place.
Yeah, so then they took away the women and the children and everybody else, and we were standing. We were the last ones. And then they chased us into a barrack and they told us to undress naked. And we were running with our hands in the air. And my father was running in front of me. And suddenly, and there was a man standing with a white coat, obviously a doctor with a uniform, but with a white coat, with a stick, pushing people right, left, right, left, right, left, links, right, left. So he pushed me to the right, and I came into a room, and I saw shower heads. So I started saying my prayers because I knew from the ghetto that they put false shower heads, and then gas comes out. So I decided, well, I'm going to die. The Rabbi will look after me, and I'll be I'll be a martyr. I'll be a Kiddush Hashem, and I'll say my prayers. So I started. But in my case, water came out, cold water, but it came out. And they threw you into a kind of vat full of acids and things, and all your orifices were burning. And then you get another shower, and then they chased you out, and they gave you the striped pajamas and wooden cloaks and everything else. And I started looking for my father because I thought to myself, if I am alive, this is a work camp. It's not a killing camp. And I knew enough about the camps in the Warsaw Ghetto that there were work camps also. So I was looking, but I couldn't find him. And the next day or a couple of days later, I learned that there was a crematorium, and everybody that went to the left went to the crematorium. And if you go to Majdanek today, you can actually see, when you run, you can actually see the room with the showers, and the vat where they threw you in with the acids and everything to purify you or whatever. And that was and that was a very it was a very difficult time for a little boy. And it's very sorry. It's easier to speak to school children and you don't go into such details, but when you speak to a Jewish audience and you kind of speak from the heart, it's not so easy to explain and to talk about these things. So I must apologize, I'm getting a bit emotional about it. And
how can one not?
Is that the first morning that I woke up in Majdanek, I noticed 3 young men were hanging from the rafters. So I thought to myself, they committed suicide. But then I was told by others later on, you've got to be very careful. I had no idea what was going on because I was a Hasidic boy and I knew nothing. I didn't even know until years later about anything. So they used to, the couples and the Blockältester, they used to commit all kinds of terrible things, and then they would hang them, and they would take them out, and they would say they committed suicide during the night. So they told me that I should try and make myself invisible, and so I tried. And the Rebbe Shalom looked after me because I mean I don't know how I survived the 3 months in Majdanek. Because there were selections, there were these appels, mitten up for mitten up and mitten up and mitten up and calisthenics, and they made you send the showers if they couldn't hours for if you couldn't kind of like they couldn't find somebody or the counts wasn't right, you could stand the people who didn't. If you lost your head, you'll die because it was summer and the sun was with people's head used to kind of swell if you didn't have a head, and then they would die, or they would be sent to the gas chamber. So it was a really impossible. It was and the Ukrainians. Most of the guards in Majdanek were Ukrainians, and they used to. Some of them even knew Yiddish, and they used to use spades to kill people. So when we went out to work and we worked with rollers, we built streets, instead of horses, instead of motorized things. So we were the horses, and we built the roads outside. And when you came back from work, you always used to bring a few bodies, because the Ukrainians used to kill you with a spade. They would say a bullet is too good for a Jew. And it was mostly Ukrainian guards. And why they were so bitterly, and they didn't only kill Jews, they killed Poles too. There were a lot of Poles in Majdanek. There were 5 camps, and a lot of Polish POWs, and they had to work. And then when we saw them killing Poles too, Christian Poles, their own religion. So this was Majdanek. And then one day, they were shouting and screaming and chasing us out and saying something. I didn't know what was going on. They chased us into a barrack and they said, you must undress. Undress means you're going to go to the gas chamber. So we undressed. But then doctors came in with stethoscopes and they checked everybody. They checked your heart, they checked your lungs, and then they chased some people out, and others, including me, they chased back into the barrack and told them to get dressed again, put on your clothes again. And then we were chosen to go to Skarżysko in a Polish ammunition factories that were built in Skarżysko Kamienne in forests to camouflage against Air Force. And I spent, because of Katz and because of his sick wife, I survived a whole year there because he helped me. And instead of working in the holes with the acids where people used to, I had a cousin who came from Łódź, Michael, this is the only photo which I found in Israel of his wedding. And my grandfather is there, but my grandfather was so religious that he turned around when they took the photo. So I see his beard, but I can't see his face. And they're sitting there, and Michael is there in the middle, and his father and Moshe Shlomo Levinson, my father's eldest sister's husband, my uncle Moshe Shlomo is there. So I've got one of these pictures which was sent to because we had a lot of family, Hasidic family. The Ger Rebbe actually encouraged Hasidim to go to Palestine. So we had family, quite a lot of family in Palestine, and my father wanted to go, but my grandfather, he didn't want him to go. So I'm kind of getting so basically, Katz, who knew my family, who knew who the Gutters were. My grandfather was one of the kind of Größe Hasidim, and he was notable, and he was a Rosh from Machzikei Adat, and he was all kinds of things, and people knew who he was. If you asked a child who was, Ichemaya Gutter, they would tell you where he lived and all that. Yeah. So he asked me to be his nurse, and that's why I survived Skarżysko for 12 months. I was I came from Majdanek to a so-called ammunition factory in Skarżysko, Kamienne, and Tali would know what that is about. And after the war, one of the writers who survived that camp wrote a book in Yiddish in 1947, and he called it the Fabriken von Teut, because they used to work into that. We got very little food. And this was Erev Tisha B'Av, 1944. It was round about end of July, I think. Tisha B'Av fell at the end of July. There were quite a few Hasidic Jews in that camp, and we knew all the holidays. We celebrated them all. It's regardless of anything, we did celebrate. And even the Jewish administration, who were, most of them were quite awful, Jewish police and Jewish, Lagerältester and so forth and so on. They actually made it possible for us to daven Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah and so forth and so on. We came back from work after 12 hours hard work on the eve of Tisha B'Av, and we were told we must go in front of the German commander Yamach Shemo Schulz and he would be sitting in his window in his office, and you must give your name. So I went like everybody else, and I gave my name, and I saw him make a tick. The next morning, they woke us up at dawn. It was always dawn to dusk. And they changed us out, and they said, you must send in a roll call, and the commander is going to come, and he's going to tell you what he wants to do. So we waited and waited until he came. And then when he came, he said that he's going to call out names. And the reason why he's calling out names is because this camp is now being closed off. And we knew why, because we could hear the guns of the Russian army coming. And everybody else is going to go to a new factory. The only thing is that we don't have enough rail wagons, and therefore those people that are going to be called out are going to go with the rail wagons, and the others will have to walk. Okay, so he called out my name, called out lots of other friends of my names, and he called out my closest friend, Jakob Guttenbaum. And so we were in rags. We had no more shoes. Our feet were rolled up with cement sacks and wire, and things were really pretty bad in that camp. And suddenly he called out the intelligentsia. We used to have, I didn't know at the time what it meant, but the Jewish administration, the collaborators, cooperators, I don't want to judge them. It's not for me to judge them today. And they used to call it the White House. Of course, to me, I didn't know what the White House was at the time. Now, of course, I do. But they were allowed, the Jewish police were allowed to have their wives, their children, and so forth and so on. And one of the policemen was Katz. And I worked with his group. I worked on the firing range, and it was very dangerous work, but it was not the worst. Suddenly, he called out the mother of our chief physician. We had a Krankenstube, a kind of, clinic. The only thing is that the clinic was an anteroom for death, because every few days there would come a truck and take people to the forest and shoot them, because if they were sick, they couldn't work. That's what their end was. So she was on very good terms with the commander. She always used to walk with him and laugh and be very good terms. And she had her elderly mother, as I told you. And he called out the mother, but he didn't call out her. So she ran towards him, and she pulled out his sleeve. And I didn't hear what she was saying, but I imagine she was saying, why don't you let me go together with my mother? She looked after the Ukrainian. Most of the guards were Ukrainian. She looked after the families of the Ukrainians. She was a wonderful physician. She even looked after Germans in Skarżysko. And she was a kind of a personality. And he wouldn't let her. He was pushing her back, pushing her back, pushing her back. I've got the picture in my mind at the moment, looking at these two. And suddenly, Schulz Yamashimo, he was a killer. So he called the mother, and he shot them both. And we looked around, and we saw all the people that were yellow, because from the picric acid, the people used to go yellow, people in rags. So we started running. We knew this was now a selection for shooting. That the names, when he took the ticks and he looked at you, then it was for shooting. It wasn't, it was all a Bobbermeister. So we ran, and I hid first in the chest where the dead bodies were. And then I must have been so frightened that I jumped out, and I went, the barracks were built on stilts. So I ran and I burrowed myself underneath like an animal to try and hide. And providentially for me, Katz found me. And he was from Lodz, he knew my family. And I was a nurse to his wife, who was dying of TB for about 6 or 7 months. And she was when I became a full-time nurse, when I came back from work, I used to look after her, I used to wash her, clean her, and be like a hospital nurse. And so he pulled me out, because, we were electrified wire and everything else. He pulled me out, and he said, look, I'm going to try and help you. And with God's help, you will survive. So he took me to the police barrack, took all my rags off, and he washed me, combed my hair, and rubbed schminka, I keep on thinking in different languages, in lipstick in my cheeks to make me look healthy, gave me proper clothing, high boots and the hat and the shirt, and I was dressed like a human being. And he said, go out, there's going to be a new rappel. If the Ukrainians find people hiding, they shoot them on the spot. There's no more nonsense about, going by this. And we went out, and we stood on a roll call. And then Schulz went from row to row, and he pulled out people. And as he pulled them out, they were surrounded now by Werkschutz, the Ukrainian, and SS with machine guns. And if anybody tried to run away, they would shoot them on the spot. And this was Tisha B'Av. And then he came and he stood in front of me and he looked at me because I was in the front row. Nobody wanted to be in the front row. And I was a youngster, weak, I suppose. So they pushed me to the front row. Next to me stood Yaakov Guttenbaum. And he was in rags like I was a few minutes before. And he came and stood in front of me. And I thought, no, he recognized me. He's going to take me. But he didn't. Without looking, he took Yaakov and he threw him into the ring where everybody was. But the miracle that happened is that 53 years later, I went to Poland. And the 45A Society, which I'm a member, which Ziggy was a member, and we publish a journal every year. And in the journal, there was a story about a youngster who went back to Warsaw, and he became a professor, and his name was Jakub. So I thought, he's a survivor. He was in Skarżysko, he was this, so I'll just meet him. And when I met him, and I'm not telling you the whole story, this turned out to be Yaakov Guttenbaum. So after 53 years, the miracle happened that we were reunited. We didn't recognize each other, but I recognized him because he had one leg shorter and he was the only one. He limped in the Skarżysko Kamienne. So this is the story of the Tisha B'Av of 1944. And then after that selection, which I told you about this, Tisha B'Av selection, the next day I was sent to Częstochowa. And there, the internal administration, again, which was Jewish, they were nice people. We never saw a German inside. He did some deal. As a matter of fact, nobody died in Skarżysko, in Częstochowa, in that camp. As a matter of fact, one young boy had appendicitis. He managed to send him to the Polish hospital in Częstochowa, operate and come back, and he survived the war. Only one person died. And why? Is because we were near the rail, where the rails used to go to Russia with the tanks and everything else. So one young man went very near, and of course the guards shot him because they thought he was trying to run away. So that's the only person that died. And I had my bar mitzvah. I found my father's close friend. They were together in the yeshiva. Of course, my father was also that smicha. Everybody that finished yeshiva in those days could have smicha, and he said, I was at your circumcision. I was on your brit in Zachonia 54 in that shtibel. And I know that you are going to be 13. I'm not sure if you're 13 now, and I don't exactly remember exactly when, but I'm going to make you bar mitzvah, so you should be a Jew. And at 12 o'clock at night, we changed. I was in a different barrack, and he and somebody from his barrack went, and he had a siddur, he had tefillin, and he put on the tefillin on me. I said the right benedictions. We had a minyan at midnight, but the levuna, because he couldn't have light on. And then he blessed me and he said, "Mit den Rebbeinu Elohim's help, as a beleben Hitler." I never forgot those few words. And what's more, I want to tell you the Nissim and the Fluers. When I was sent to Buchenwald, and from Buchenwald I was sent to Kolditz because the factory who I was the Hassak factory, Hugo Schneider Aktiengesellschaft, who I was sold by the SS as a slave laborer, they were looking for the people that they knew were good workers. So they came to Buchenwald and they took us out from Buchenwald to Kolditz. And who do I find there? I find him. And another miracle. When we arrived there, the officers, the guards, first of all, there was no camp. It was a hole where they set up, bunks, and we were locked up at night. And we came to a factory where they made Panzerfaust. You know what a Panzerfaust? It's a bazooka against tanks. Panzerfaust. So we were making Panzerfaust. And as we arrived there was a roll call. And the first thing, this Oberscharführer, who was a sergeant or something like that, 50-year-old, tall guy, I remember exactly what he looked like. And he said, "Ob das kleine Buben, die müssen aussteigen. If there are young men here, they must step out." And nobody steps out because you don't volunteer. Young children, you don't know what's going to happen to you. But Pinchas Gutters steps out, the only one. So then he allocates everybody work, and then he takes me by hand and takes me to the SS kitchen, and he sits in the kitchen of the SS, and he said, "Du wirst arbeiten." So you can imagine the 3.5 months that I was in Kolditz, which was near Leipzig, I worked in the kitchen. And I managed in the evening to take my soup and my bread, and we weren't fed so badly because they needed our work. And I gave it to the friend of my father's, and he survived the war. And as a matter of fact, he went to Israel, and he came to Paris when I was in Paris with my cousin. It's a long story, which I'm not going to get involved in. And he stayed in my bedroom for about 3 months until he got permission to go to Israel. And he remarried, and he had lots of children. He became a Rosh Yeshiva, very famous in Israel. And he only died a couple of years ago. He was in his late 90s, and he survived the war. So how do you explain all these things? How can you explain these things? You can't explain them by rationality. I mean, to me, I can't explain these things because it just doesn't. It's important in such an upheaval, in such a hell, for these things to happen.
This was one of those miracles that you shared with us, and as we are gathering together today, it's a very, very appropriate one story amongst many, because you were in camps that are notorious, Krzyzewska, Buchenwald. I mean, those are places of hell. We are coming to an end of our program, and I would like you to maybe tell our audience about your liberation, getting to Theresienstadt, and the liberation from Theresienstadt. And again, maybe choose a story or two. I remember the story of the horse. Maybe you will share with us some of those stories of the war is over. What is happening to Pinchas Guttер?
Well, we left Kolditz on a death march. We were approximately 1,500 people. And the first night, and they gave us actually quite a bit of food. They gave us at least a whole bread, and they gave us sausage and cheese, and so you could live on it for a few days. Suddenly, one of the guards, he was an Unterscharführer, who was like a corporal or something, and he was originally from Poland. He was a Volksdeutsch, so he spoke Polish, and he said to us, the Americans are coming, and they started changing their uniforms. And so people started eating the food, and we were in a forest, and, we were not far from where we left. And suddenly, a whole troop of SS came. They started shooting in the air, and they said, "You must lie down with your face in the ground, and if you lift your head, we're going to kill you." And that was the end of our liberation at that time. That was one day after we left. And then we started walking. And the same guards that were in that camp or that hall that looked after us, they were walking with us. And anybody that couldn't continue walking, they didn't give us any food, they didn't give us any water. Sometimes we were on a farm, and they put us in a barn, and we found raw corn, so we would eat it, and we found a beres, with water, so we would drink. Otherwise, we would drink with ditches from ditches, kind of if there was dirty water, or people would take dried leaves, and I mean, half of us died on the way. When we arrived in Theresienstadt, I collapsed in front of one of the columns. I was in Theresienstadt after the war, years later with my wife, and I showed her the column from which I collapsed in. Somebody came and gave me a piece of bread and a piece of sausage. But I was in a very good condition because I'd spent 3.5 months working in the SS kitchen. And about 3.5 weeks later, or something like that, and I don't exactly remember, suddenly shouting. We were sleeping I was in the Hamburger Kaserne, and we were sleeping in bunks again. And then suddenly shouting, we are free, we are free, we are free. So we started running out. We didn't have to dress because we're sleeping in our clothes. So I jumped out and I ran out together with other young boys, and we saw these, infantry, Russian infantry, walking with the bandoliers, and they didn't. They had the white boots, and they had the tobacco on one side, bread in the other, newspapers, and they used to kind of roll up, and they used to start. And the Czechs and the Russians were chasing out the Germans that were settled in Moravia and Bohemia by Hitler during the 38 and 39 or whatever. And they were being chased out. And there were women with prams and the old men, and they were beating them, and they were taking, I didn't know what it meant, but at the time they were grabbing young girls and taking them into a forest, and obviously abusing them and things like that. And I felt terribly sorry for these people. That was the day of liberation. As a matter of fact, I told the story, and then of course I spied a wagon with horses in the field, standing, and I didn't know who it belongs to. And because I loved horses, I ran to the horses, and I started, nuggling them and kind of petting them and so forth and so on. And I stayed there waiting for the owner to come, and nobody came. So after about an hour, I got onto the wagon, and I took the whip. You don't hit a horse, you just show it the whip. That's the horse knows that you show a whip. And then I pulled the reins, and I pulled it left, and he went right and right. And I said, Vio, I suppose Czech Vio is the same. And he went, and I became a contractor to the Czech and the Russian army for the next 3 months when I was in Dresden. When I came back, they asked me, are these horses yours? I said, yes, they're my horses. And so they said, we are going to employ you. Do you want to work for us? I said, yes. So we'll give you 5,000 korunas a month, and then you become our contractor. And I schlepped all kinds of things for them. And I also went around the farms collecting food and fruit for my friends and for people that were sick because there was typhoid epidemic. I had typhoid in Skaržisko, so I was immune to the typhoid, to fleck fever. And so I spent the first 3 months in Theresienstadt being a contractor. And because I didn't have a stall, so there was a ruined place, and I created a stall for the horses. I cut hay for them. I went to Russian cooks, and I begged them to give me Huber, because horses can't exist only on hay. They're going to get sick. So Gropen and Huber and actually fed them old bread, which gave them diarrhea. I mean, I had big tsuras with these horses. They became like my family. And I used to sleep, instead of sleeping in my bunk in the Hamburger Kaserne, I used to go sleep with the horses in the stall. So this is the first 3 months until they decided that they were going to take 1,000 children, the British, for rehabilitation in Germany, in England. And then we went to the Royal Air Force to Windermere, to Trouberg Bridge, which was a place like that. But before I left, I told the Czechs that I am not leaving the horses because these are my horses. So the one Czech had the brilliant idea. And he said to me, horses can't fly in aeroplanes. You're going to go in an aeroplane, but horses can go on boats. So we're going to send the horses on boats. No, ich wart noch. I'm still waiting for the horses. So this is my liberation.
Amazing.
Wonderful, Pinchas. Pinchas, just two real, one question for me and one request for me, and that is, you've clearly seen the worst of what man can do to man in the 21st century. You've been an eyewitness and a victim, if I can use that word, to the worst of humanity. You've survived, thank God. What message do you have for humanity coming out of what you've come out from?
My message is a very simple one. And this message was told thousands of years ago by our sages. You must regard every person as yourself. Everybody is exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether there's only one God. There are not thousands of gods. And I think everybody knows that. But you pray to God. So we are all the same human beings. And we must be treated as individuals. We mustn't just tolerate. Remembrance, I don't accept that tolerance is enough. To tolerate is already a beginning, but toleration is not enough. You must always remember that a person who is next to you, you must accept them as yourself. You must remember that they are God's creation, and that because they are God's creation, they are the same as you. I don't believe, for example, in judicial murder. I don't believe in the death penalty. I don't believe that that Holocaust persecutors should be put to death. I think that, they should be judged. If you find that the persecutor was active during the war, persecuting, then you should judge him in a law court and lock him up for the rest of his life as an example. But I do not believe in judicial murder. I don't believe in the death penalty. I believe that human beings are God's creation and we are all the same. So the most important thing is to make the world a better place. You must treat everyone as you want to treat yourself. Accept yourself, accept everybody else as you accept yourself. That is my message to humanity, and make the world a much better place.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pinchas. Pinchas, someone once went to the Satmar Rebbe and asked the Satmar Rebbe for a broch, and the Satmar Rebbe said, "Why are you coming to me? Go to someone with a number, a metaphorical number." So here we're coming to you, Pinchas, and we're asking you on this Tisha B'Av night, can you please give us a brocha for Klal Israel, for the ganze Welt, from what you've been through?
It is very interesting, and I'll tell you again, you ask me a question, you always get the story. I was in Cape Town. I used to come back every year because I have lots of friends, and the Cape Town community is very close to me, and I was involved for many years in community work. So I'm still, part of, to me, I'm still part of that community. And we went to some place, I can't remember, it may have been one of the, outside by the river or in a hotel. And of course, Saturday morning, we were davening. So they could hear me that I was kind of like davening out. So they gave me a talis and they said, you must be the, the cantor. So I davened. And after that, I got talking to a Hasidic Jew or a religious Jew. I don't know, from the United States. I don't know where he was from. And I told him that when I was a young boy in Shavnitsa, I met a Ger Rabbi, and my grandfather was ill at the time. So my father asked me, I must go and give the Ger Rabbi a kvittel. And I was all of about maybe 6 years old. It was the second time I was in Shavnitsa. And so I went up, and the Ger Rebbe was sitting, like on a throne outside, and there was a long line. And by the time I came, he shook my hand, and I said, and the Ger Rebbe said that the Rebbeinu Shalom on the telephone and I went away. So this man said to me, "You actually shook the Ger Rebbe's hand?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Please bless me." Well, the only blessing that I will give is a blessing which I know is, and I'm not going to use other Shem because I really want to be a proper blessing. I'm doing it in the proper way. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. You are Adonai panav alecha v'chineka. Yisa Adonai panav alecha yasem lecha shalom.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Pinchas. Before I hand over to Tali to conclude, just on behalf of myself and all of us listening at the base, and I know that the rabbi's going to thank you at the end. It's been our absolute pleasure and privilege to listen to you. Your story is a haunting one, but at the end of the day, it's a story of survival. It's a story of faith, and the Eibishter should bless you and your precious family with alle gute Sachen. A großen Dank. God a große Dankbarkeit für dir. Eine große Liebe. Sei gesund. Gute Nacht.
Pinchas, I know you have so many to give us so many stories. And I want to thank you for not only speaking to us, but to speaking to so many thousands and thousands of students and teachers and communities, not only in South Africa and in Canada, but all around the world. Pinchas, your books, the films that were made about you, and of course, you being the first of Stephen Smith, our mutual friends, New Dimensions in Testimony. And for our audience, just to say, please go to the Shoah Foundation, search for Pinchas Guttер, and you can ask Pinchas, the hologram of Pinchas, I don't know how to call it, the image, the recorded image of Pinchas, any question that you want, and Pinchas will answer your question. And this is the new technology that allows thousands and thousands from around the world, but also here in South Africa, to learn from you, Pinchas, to learn about your stories, to ask you questions, and to continue to learn from you for many, many, many years to come. So with that, I wanted to thank you and to wish you and Dorothy and all your family health and always happiness and joy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been an honor to talk to you. And you know, I am a great fan of yours. Whenever you appear on any kind of Zooms, I am there waiting to just listen to what you have to say, because whatever you say is very important. And I kind of it's extremely valuable to have someone like you, who has been honored and all over the world, and you've been a ambassador for the Jewish people. I mean, never mind for Holocaust survival only, but for the Jewish people. And I think that's very important. And I regard myself also, as I said to you beginning, as a chiyuv. I regard myself not only as a survivor, but as an ambassador for Jewish resistance, but also for Jewish conscience and Jewish survival and Jewish culture and Jewish spirituality and Jewish humanity and Judaism as such. How important it is possible to observe your Jewishness and your spirituality even at the worst possible times and the worst possible circumstances. For example, I didn't do it, but there were men in Skaržisko, and particularly one particular who became a Große Rosh Yeshiva, and his name was Kamionka. I don't know if you know that name. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Gateshead, and became a Große Talmud Chacham. And Kamionka used to, I have no idea how, but he got a Choyrev Talmud, a little Choyrev Talmud, you know, the one of those where the pages were like cigarette paper. And by the sun, he used to be in the same barrack as I was. And and our lights had to be out at a certain time, and I don't remember when, 9 or whatever. And he would stand in the window whenever there was a lavuna, and he would open the little Talmud and he would study it. And we are starving. We were on very small rations, but Yom Kippur, they didn't eat. They fasted and they observed. And they had a minyan, and they asked the Jewish police, and the Jewish police, because of their fear of God, despite the fact that they didn't do anything, most of them were not very nice people, and they kind of like used to beat us and things like that, and they used to behave like Germans. They were looking out so that no SS would come in, because if they found anybody praying those were, for example, there was a night shift and a day shift. So the night shift on Yom Kippur would have a minyan, and they would actually daven, even if they did not have Sidurim, because they knew most of the prayers off by heart. A lot of them knew it. So from that point of view, the fact that I had a bar mitzvah in Częstochowa, that Harav Gottel Eisner, who was on my brit decided that I had to have a bar mitzvah, regardless of what was going around, regardless that I had to load every day tons of steel in a wagon to be able to get reasonably good food, because we were fed reasonably well in Czestochowa. We worked very hard, but Czestochowa was not the worst camp at all. So from my point of view, that Yiddishkeit was there all the time, even amongst the most secular. When it came to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, even those vile policemen. And again, I want to say, I don't want to judge them, or I don't want to condemn them, and I don't know whether they collaborated, cooperated, or they tried to save their own families. I mean, it's difficult to judge people when you weren't there, and you don't know what you would have done. But there were a lot of good people. For example, when I had typhoid, a woman who used to work with the Polish workers, who was friendly, she was from the area, and she used to get food. She brought me an apple. I didn't even see an apple in the Warsaw Ghetto, but she gave me an apple because this young boy who was working night shift with a black powder, she knew he had typhoid and he had to recover. So she brought me an apple and took it away from herself. Now, to me, that's all part of Yiddishkeit. It's all part of the continuity of our upbringing, of our culture, of our spirituality, and that's all the only thing that I can call it. Because, and I'm sure it's also around. It's there in all other cultures. We are not the only ones. You can see a lot of goodness in a lot of people. I want to tell you something which you won't believe it. This sergeant, this Oberscharführer, the one that took me to the SS kitchen, he was the only one who had a bicycle. He was driving backwards and forwards on the whole column to see if everybody. And every time I lagged back and I kind of couldn't walk fast enough, he would come and he would push me back into the column and he would say, "You must marschieren." He was trying to save this little boy. So there was a spark of goodness in him too, this Oberscharführer, this SS Oberscharführer. So as far as I'm concerned, we are all, as I said before, we were all created by the Rebbeinu Shalom. And we all have got the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The only thing is that sometimes the Yetzer Hara takes over. But we must fight and make sure that the Yetzer Tov, the good angel, the one that is inside us, should fight and overcome the bad one, and that we should all, make the world a much better place. And things like what's going on at the moment, like the war in the Ukraine, suffering in Sudan, and all these other places which break your heart when you see the pictures on television, they should disappear from the world. And the world, and I don't know what the meaning is when Mashiach will come. But and there's a song in Yiddish. Soll schon sein der Gille, und soll schon sein der Gille. Mashiach soll schon kommen, und soll schon sein der Gille, und soll schon sein der Gille, und soll schon sein der Gille. Mashiach soll schon kommen. And this I remember from a little child, because this is what we used to sing, especially on Simchat Torah, when we were walking around with the little flags with a little candle on top and an apple and things like that. We used to sing, and Zol schon sein der Gille, and Zol schon sein der Gille, and Zol schon sein der Gille, Mashiach soll schon kommen. De Rabbi soll geben, soll Masach Jorn, and ihr sollt da alle gesinnt, and in Starek, and the ganze Mishpuches, and so da Shulam of Yisrael. This is the most important.
So just before, while we wait for just to Pinchas to join here, just going to have a quick 10-minute Q&A with Pinchas, and then the rabbi is just going to thank him. Or shall we on? The quiz.
Hello, I'm here. You can hear me.
Okay. Pinchas, good evening from Tisha B'Av in Johannesburg, live from the Beis Shul. It's Tisha B'Av already where we are.
in Toronto, there's still a couple of hours to go. Pinchas, thank you. Once again, a großen Dank. Tyra Yid, riveting testimony. Pinchas, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you more or less, yes.
Okay, so Pinchas, just before we aired the interview we did with you, Rabbi Blachman, a guest rabbi from Israel, spoke about Tisha B'Av and what it meant for Jews to commemorate Tisha B'Av in the third decade of the 21st century. So the Tisha B'Av, as everyone knows, commemorates the Churban Beit HaMikdash, but you actually witnessed the Churban of your own people, European Jewry, live. What does Tisha B'Av mean to you as a person who's actually witnessed the Churban and is one of the last surviving generational members, really the last of the epoch?
Well, it means a lot of things, but I think the main thing it means is that regardless of the fact that what we say in the Aguda, they try to do away with us from time to time, we are still around and we still, commemorating the Churban Beit HaMikdash in all the other Churbans that happened to the Jews all the time. And we actually are what I would say, an example of resilience in the face of iniquity. I think it shows that the Jewish people, that our culture, it shows us as an example of what actually can happen. And I think that we are almost like, in a good way, the canary that shows what resistance and what kind of keeping on to your own, to the goodness and to the empathy of humanity is what you can achieve, that you can go through all the hells that were created by all kinds of deviltry, and you can still continue and hope whatever. As I said before, I don't know what the Mashiach is, and the Mashiach, and when he will come, or what he will do, or how, and what, and when. But to me, the Mashiach means that the world is going to be a much better place than it is today, and we are going forward towards. And I have got the good examples. For example, if refugees have been treated in the 30s, the way refugees are being treated today, and they're not being treated wonderfully, but they are treated. And there are camps for them, and the United Nations is doing something for them. So there is, for example, Canada took in 30,000 Syrian refugees. So the thing is that the world is getting drip by drip better, and I think that this is what I think about when I think about the resilience, and especially when I think about all the Churbanim that happened to us.
Thank you, Pinchas. We've got time for literally one question, then I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Zulberg to thank you and conclude. Is there any question from the floor that anyone would like me to pose to Pinchas while we've got Pinchas live? Yes. Can I ask through the whole of his experience, not just the ghetto? Pinchas, just a question from someone in the shul here. From the start to finish of the Churban, okay, of your experience in the Churban, was there ever a moment that you thought it would be better to geworden toit, than to live.
No. My father did everything in his power to make us survive. And even in the last moments in Majdanek, when he told me that I must say that I am 5 years older than I was, he actually saved my life, because all the documents that I've got now from the different camps, from Buchenwald and others, shows that I was born 5 years before, before 1932. So basically, I was a worker, and I survived. So, and it never in my mind did I even think for 1 second that I wanted to survive. And I think Harav Godel Eisner, when he made the Bar Mitzvah, believed that Judaism and Jews will survive. I mean, he benched me. He said, Rabbi Shalom wird helfen als das Überleben Hitler, Yemach Shemo. And I've never forgotten that. And when he came to Paris on the way smuggled himself out of Poland, and he came to Paris, he stayed in my room together with a friend of his. We bought 2 hotel kind of sleeping chairs, and they slept. And they lived in my room. I had a small room, but they lived in my room for 3 months, and then they went to Israel, and they survived. So there wasn't a moment in my that I thought of anything else. No, I don't accept it. I don't believe in it, and I don't accept it. And it's not part of Jewish thought, and it's not part of Judaism.
Thank you, Pinchas. Thank you. Pinchas, thank you very, very much. As I said to you, großen Dank, großen Dankbarkeit, alle gute Sachen, broches, broches, and broches. I'd like to hand over to Rabbi Zulberg to conclude.
Stay with me, yeah.
I'm just moving, yeah.
Come close to me.
Yeah, I can see it's already, it's already Tisha B'Av in your place. We
Yes.
still got a few hours to go.
Yeah, you still have a few more hours. Pinchas, I just wanted to say again, it's so nice to see you. Even if it is Tisha B'Av, it's very nice to see you. And it's truly humbling that you agreed to speak to our community and to give brachas to our community and to open up in such an honest and open way to all of us. It's really been an unbelievable experience. So certainly on behalf of the whole community here in South Africa, the base community in particular, we say a very big thank you to you, and that you should have a lot of strength to continue to do the amazing work that you do, the education that you do, and the inspiration that you do to continue inspiring people. Thank you very much.
Toda Rabba.
B'cho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam. Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam. Oitcho Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam. Oitcho Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, shimcho li'olam. Oy oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam. Ay oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam. Oy decho Hashem, Hashem Elokai, b'chol levavi, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, v'chabdo shimcho li'olam, shimcho li'olam. I thank you, Hashem, with all of my heart, b'chol levavi, and I'll honor your name, shimcho li'olam, for all eternity. Yeah,